These companies have consolidated a historic amount of economic and political power, just like the empires of old. You do not need to unlock the benefits of AI through a corrosive approach. So why are we not holding these companies to those higher standards?
Karen Hao, who says the AI industry is a reckless race for global domination. I think you do have a problem with the people at the top, right?
We often obsess over the cast of characters at the top. Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? Who's the less bad guy that I'm able to settle with? And what I'm saying is that's not the only option. We shouldn't have to live with companies that are so vastly powerful where one person at the top is able to decide all these things.
From Bloomberg Weekend, this is the Mishal Husain Show. I don't know if you, at the point that you tap a prompt into ChatGPT or Claude, Gemini, Microsoft Copilot, whatever you use, if you ever stop for a moment and wonder how the data got there in the first place. I suspect you don't. Few of us do. These AI tools have been revolutionary in the last few years in the way that so many of us have changed how we work or how we learn. But Karen Hao, who's talked to me for this episode, wants us all to step back and to really think about what the process involves. That is not only the land used for the data centers, the water, the energy involved, but the actual process of gathering and preparing the data, where it comes from, who does the work in putting it together. Karen trained as a mechanical engineer and then did work in Silicon Valley before turning to journalism. She's written a book called Empire of AI, and it's that use of the word empire to describe the top AI companies that I ask her to explain right at the start of this. It started, I think, when she spent a few days inside OpenAI, observing them. They were not a well-known company at the time. She wrote about them in a less than flattering way. Today, it is safe to say that there is no love lost between Karen Hao and the top execs of the AI world. And you'll get a sense of that in my written notes that accompany this conversation. As ever, you'll find them at bloomberg.com/Mishal. You'll get the backstory to this conversation and what I followed up on afterwards. Karen and I spoke in London, where there was something on the table that caught her eye as she came into the studio. That moment is where this begins.
Also, I love this mind map. Do you do this?
Oh, yes, I do this.
This is awesome.
But I wish my writing was a little bit neater.
It's so neat. I'm always so fascinated by the format in which people take notes because it really is such a window into how they think. Yeah.
So what does this reveal about me that I don't think in a linear way?
Yeah, in a non-linear way. Which I think is probably a lot more information dense.
Essentially, it's what enables recall because, you don't want to be referring to it too much. It's whatever helps imprint it in your brain. So at least I feel it.
Pope? Question mark.
Oh, God. Very good. You're reading upside down. Now, yeah. I would love to start with your own words because you write in Empire of AI that over the years you found only one metaphor that encapsulates the nature of what these AI power players are, and that is empires, not engaged in overt violence and brutality as we know from history, but they too seize and extract precious resources to feed their vision of artificial intelligence. Now, that is a real attack on the companies behind some of the defining tools of our age. What is it that's made you feel so strongly?
These companies have consolidated a historic amount of economic and political power, and they are becoming fast the supreme powers in the world, just like the empires of old. And they do this through the dispossession of resources, labor, value from the majority. They lay claim to resources that are not their own, the data of individuals, the intellectual property of artists, writers, and creators. They exploit an extraordinary amount of labor through both the workers that they use and exhaust to produce their technologies, as well as the workers whose jobs get automated away by the deployment of these technologies. So there is this category of work that is involved in the production of these technologies, including content moderation, including the labeling and cleaning of training data that's called data work. That kind of work is now the number 4 fastest growing work in the US. And the types of people who are doing this work are scientists, lawyers, college graduates, PhD graduates, and they are essentially providing their knowledge and their expertise to the training of these models, but under deeply exploitative, poorly paid conditions where they are not working 9 to 5s. They are in their homes waiting for work to arrive. They never know when it's going to arrive. They never know when it's going to go away. They're being pitted against each other. You know, I've been covering this kind of work for almost 8 years now. And it's the same story again and again. With every single community that it hits, you see the same exact patterns of exploitation.
Are you saying that we should be thinking about the exploitation of labor at the point that we're using Claude or ChatGPT?
Yeah, absolutely. So other industries have had similar problems. The fashion industry also engaged in a lot of labor exploitation and a lot of environmental degradation. The answer was never, let's just get rid of clothes altogether. The answer was always, let's hold ourselves to higher standards in producing clothes without those problems.
It's still work, though, isn't it? And there are so many communities where in different parts of the world there is an absence of work altogether. I just want to ask you whether you think that there are definitely challenges in this industry, and your work really details them and deconstructs them. But is there an aspect of this that is about the challenges of our age, that it's not necessarily more exploitative than what's gone before? It's the problems of our time.
I want to go back to what you were saying, that it is work, though, because what is happening with this US case now is that the people are actually people that are highly educated and could have gotten full-time employment. But the reason why they do not have access to better work now is also because of the AI industry.
Taking away jobs.
It's because of the way that the AI industry designs its technology and sells it as a tool for automating knowledge work. And so there's a shrinking job market. For the unemployed population in the US, 25% of them are 4-year college degree holders. That's a historic record. And so it's not actually just giving work to people who don't have work. It's actually degrading the work opportunities that exist right now, taking knowledge workers out of a full-time employment kind of situation into a gig work kind of situation.
So what do you say to a country like Malta, which has just signed a major agreement with OpenAI, where everyone who lives in Malta is going to get free access to ChatGPT Plus for a year? They're going to go on a course to learn how to use it. And the government of Malta is very proud of this agreement because it says it puts Malta at the forefront of the digital age.
I've met a lot of policymakers from developing countries, from smaller countries that do see themselves as they can only participate in this revolution if they offer themselves up for sale. Just because the government is proud of this partnership and they think that this is what gives them the seat at the table, that it's actually leading to their citizens having a more dignified life.
But their government would see it as equipping them for work or access to knowledge or everything else that they will need to use large language models for.
I would argue they are being exploited, and I would be curious what the Malta people think, not what the Malta government thinks. And the reason why I think they are being exploited is because they are having their data harvested to train the next generations of models. And that's why these companies are going out and striking these partnerships. They need more and more and more data. They need more and more and more data centers to produce their technologies. And one of the challenges when it comes to searching for different sources of data is that they have run out of internet data. They've run out of high quality internet data. And so now one of the best sources of high quality data is straight from the user. And so if they can strike these whole of country partnerships, I mean, you get a whole of country database to upload freely.
Like what kinds of thing? Like everything that's, if I was part of it, it would be everything that's on my phone, which is...
Yeah. You know, some people think of this as just, oh, well, I was using Google. I was, you know, saying a lot of things to Google and personal data as well. But I mean, I've never seen people upload their medical files to Google to ask for an interpretation of it. But people do that with ChatGPT, with Gemini, with Claude. And that's intimate medical information.
Is there no positive side of it for you, Karen? Like that uploading of medical data, if it's done with consent, isn't it part of the progress of science? You might get something that troubles you diagnosed, or you might be part of helping wider diagnosis.
What I have problems with is the fact that it is in the hands of deeply powerful companies that have absolutely no accountability to the people that they're actually affecting around the world. And this is why I call them empires. That's the governance structure of an empire. You at the top are able to make hundreds of decisions in a day that then have cascading effects on billions of people around the world. And there are no formal mechanisms by which those billions of people can actually challenge, contest, provide feedback. That's why we've historically moved from empires to democracies, because democracies are these institutionalized ways for people to say when they like something, when they don't like something, and how they want to collectively govern and self-determine their future.
Are you actually saying that the power of these companies is greater than the power of governments?
They are definitely increasingly becoming that way. Absolutely.
Like even the US government, the most powerful country in the world?
I would say so. I mean, when there was the recent spat between Anthropic and the Department of War, the Department of War used the nuclear option to try and get a company to fall in line, which is to threaten to declare this company as a supply chain risk.
Which would affect its work right across the US government.
The company, Anthropic, still did not fall in line.
But isn't that because it did well in another way? It took the moral high ground, and maybe we can talk about that a bit later, but it got lots more users from the PR of that moment.
Absolutely. Anthropic won in this situation, both PR and in this spat. What I'm saying is this was a moment that demonstrates that these companies can, in fact, have more power than the U.S. government. They are willing to actually go against the U.S. government because they know that whatever penalty comes at them from the government might actually be counterbalanced by the other benefits that come directly to the company.
By profit elsewhere.
Yeah.
So tell me then, Karen, what is the answer? Because I know there's a call to action in your book. You clearly think that things can be and should be done another way. What are you hoping for? And do you think a figure like the Pope, like a unique figure, way outside the sort of government policy realm, is the kind of person who might provide some kind of roadmap here?
I think it's important for all leaders in society, whether religious or otherwise, to be thinking about these questions and thinking about how to ultimately protect human agency at a time when the way that Silicon Valley conceives its technology is in fact threatening it. And we've seen Pope Leo be quite strong on these issues and identify early on in his papacy that this is a particular issue where he is deeply concerned about the pathway of technology development undermining human dignity. And to go to your question of what is actually the answer here, I mean, one of the things that I always say is AI is like the word transportation. Transportation refers to everything from bicycles to rockets. And in the same way, AI refers to a very vast collection of different technologies, some of which are designed kind of like rockets. They're very resource intensive and they exact a lot of cost to produce. And so in general, we only deploy rockets for a very narrow subset of transportation needs. We never go around and say every single person should have a rocket and use that rocket for every single one of their transportation needs. That would destroy the environment. And it would also just be really inefficient and probably not actually get people to places faster because of the amount of time it would take to boot up the rocket. And so what I suggest in my book and throughout my other work is that we need to shift our portfolio of AI technologies to better reflect the kinds of specialized AI that we in fact need to tackle real societal challenges. Things like improving healthcare and accelerating drug discovery. DeepMind's AlphaFold, it is an example of a system that I call a bicycle of AI. It is a system that predicts with high accuracy how an amino acid sequence will fold into a protein structure. This is really important for accelerating the understanding of human disease and then designing drugs to target those diseases. And it won the Nobel Prize for chemistry. This is a technology, even though it's called AI and ChatGPT is also called AI, DeepMind's AlphaFold is one that is fundamentally different from how ChatGPT is produced and how it operates. It uses very little data. It uses very little computing resources. And there's no need for labor exploitation either. And it's still able to provide a lot of benefits. So my question is, when you look at the portfolio of AI technologies, wouldn't you want to pick the ones that have great benefit, very little cost? Why would you want to pick the ones that have very great cost?
Right. But these are value judgments, right? And something that you think has no value, someone else might. Like, let's take AI in defense. We know already that many armies use it for targeting and the use of weapons. You might see that as wrong. Others might see that this is necessary defense. It's part of the defense of your realm. And if you're not going to do it through the tools of our age, then you're going to fall behind. And the bad actors, terrorists, bad governments, whatever, are going to get you.
Yeah, I think that's a particularly controversial issue where people fall in different places. What I'm arguing is there's many different ways to produce AI. You do not need to unlock the benefits of AI through a corrosive approach. So why are we not holding these companies to those higher standards?
I'm conscious that both Anthropic and OpenAI are heading towards public offerings of their shares. Is that a moment that you think could bring greater accountability, that once a company is public and it's got all kinds of investors and it's got annual general meetings, that a level of scrutiny that is lacking comes in, a useful one?
I do think it could be. I am hopeful that it could be, because when companies become public, they do institute more governance structures. But I lay this critique on existing public companies as well. I call Google, Amazon, Microsoft empires of AI as well. I do think that ultimately governance needs to come from the public and from publicly elected officials as well, not just the market forces.
And not the founders. It sounds like you don't have faith in the actual people running these companies. A lot of your book is about OpenAI and Sam Altman in particular. Tell me the story of how you got to know him and the company back in the beginning of this work.
I started covering AI in 2018 for MIT Technology Review, and that is a publication that focuses a lot on fundamental AI research. So I was reading scientific papers every week, talking with researchers at universities and corporate labs. And OpenAI, it became part of my radar because at the time it was a nonprofit fundamental AI research lab, and it was one of the only ones. There was OpenAI, then there was Google, then there was DeepMind, and there were just a few others, but that was kind of it. And so in 2019, I proposed to OpenAI that there were a lot of changes happening at the organization. They had just created a for-profit arm. They had just gotten a big investment from Microsoft, that maybe they wanted to reintroduce themselves to the public. And I suggested that if they were interested in that, I could profile them. So I went to the corporate offices and embedded within the organization for 3 days, interviewed a lot of employees and executives.
Including Sam Altman?
Sam Altman was actually not very important at the time, so no, because he had just officially become CEO. He was previously just co-chairman and didn't really have much to do with the organization at all. And so they set up interviews for me with Greg Brockman, the chief technology officer, and Ilya Sutskever, the chief scientist, who were the main runners of the organization's day-to-day.
And they didn't like the profile you wrote.
They did not. They did not.
You said at that time that there was a misalignment between what they were actually doing and their promises. What was it that made you say that? What did you see that led you to that?
At that time, the misalignment that I saw was they're called OpenAI for what they said was a commitment to transparency. And this organization was already deeply secretive. And I noticed this culture in the way that employees were very, very nervous about what they said to me and where I was allowed to go within the offices. So that seemed already quite bizarre. And they also said as a nonprofit that they would never commercialize their technologies.
And now, of course, they're fully for profit, which is the source of the case that's collapsed between Elon Musk and Sam Altman. Is Elon Musk then the good guy in this for you?
No, no. I mean, here's the thing. I think we often obsess over the cast of characters at the top, and we're always trying to think like, who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? Who's the less bad guy that I'm able to settle with because that's all the option set there is? And what I'm saying is that's not the only option set. We shouldn't have to live with companies that are so vastly powerful where one person at the top is able to decide all these things. It's a governance structure that's the problem. It's not that I think the problem will be solved if we just swap out one of these characters for one another or for a new person.
But I think you do have a problem with the people at the top, right? Or certainly the small number of people at the top. And you kind of know the world that they came from because you were part of that same world. You went to MIT, you worked for a startup. This could actually have been the industry of your life rather than you reporting from the outside. So I get the impression that you do have a problem with these characters.
Yes. I do have a particular problem with the culture that they're steeped in and the ideologies that they have because it's an imperialist ideology. I mean, Sam Altman said before he stepped into his position as CEO of OpenAI, he was president of Y Combinator, and he said, I'm going to invest in 10x more companies year after year until I invest in every company under the sun. and there's this kind of sense of all the people that are steeped in that Silicon Valley culture, which I was a part of, which is why I'm so familiar with. He was pretty young at the time,
though. Maybe it was hubris, foolishness.
Except that it's echoed through the way that he approaches OpenAI strategy. Let's scale the models 10x more every year until we have reached the scale of the human brain. You know, like he's always thinking in these kinds of terms, and all of them are thinking in these kinds of terms of let's just keep scaling and scaling and scaling, and it's growth at all costs. And that is very particular to the culture of Silicon Valley innovation right now. So I do have a particular problem with the culture and with the people that have grown up in that culture. And also, I don't think that the fundamental issue that I'm articulating in this book will be solved by simply swapping in another person.
Are there any less bad guys? Like, do you think Anthropic is a more principled company than OpenAI?
No.
Even though it stood up to the Pentagon?
So interestingly, Dario Amodei, CEO of Anthropic, said that he actually did not have issues with fully autonomous weapons. In fact, he believed that this was a technology where the US probably should keep up. The problem was simply that he didn't want this version of Claude to be used for that.
And Claude has been used in AI-assisted targeting. It's been used in Iran. I think it's reportedly been used on the raid on Maduro in Venezuela as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Are you also following the Chinese AI players, DeepSeek and other companies like that?
Very, very loosely.
Do you believe that they behave differently, or do you accuse them of imperialism also?
It's really interesting. They do behave differently because of a very particular reason. So when ChatGPT first came out, all of the Chinese tech giants did the same thing as the other US tech giants, which was try to make their own version of ChatGPT. I was at the Wall Street Journal at the time. So it was actually right before ChatGPT came out. The US government used this mechanism called export controls to block Chinese companies from getting access to the most cutting edge AI computer chips. And those are the ones that are designed by NVIDIA. And so all of a sudden, the entire country of China and these Chinese companies faced an enormous constraint on one of the core resources that US companies were using to supercharge their AI development. So Chinese companies had to take a different route. They were not able to scale the same way that the US companies were. And that, I think, is what led to DeepSeek. DeepSeek was an example of a Chinese company figuring out how to develop the same capabilities of AI, these AI models, but for a significantly less fraction of computational resources. DeepSeek illustrates the exact point that I'm making, that it is in fact possible to produce AI different types of AI and also the same exact kind of AI with significantly less resources, and therefore have a much less corrosive impact on community and planetary health. So why are we not doing that?
But ultimately, are you more comfortable by the leaders in this industry being from the United States rather than from China? Even though you think there's a lack of governance, do you still think the fact that you and I can talk about the US players, these companies, in the way that we are, that there is, again, a degree of scrutiny and accountability which is entirely absent in China on that field?
I think there's a tendency a lot in the media to assume that the race is between US and China, between nation states, rather than open versus closed models. And for me, I feel much more comfortable developing an open source ecosystem around AI innovation. And I feel comfortable if that open source model is coming from China or if it's coming from the US, because it's open, it's scrutinizable, it's something that can be audited, it can be improved on and built upon by many researchers and scientists around the world. Closed models simply don't do that. And there are plenty of open source models coming out of China as out of the US, but also the major dominant players that I critique are all closed.
And they've ended up being the most successful ones.
I mean, it depends on how you define success.
I want to ask about you as well, Karen, because you've clearly devoted a huge amount of time and energy to your work in this area. And I know that you said like you were looking for some kind of service in your life, like what would you do with your life? Do you think this is your mission, that pointing out the flaws in these companies, digging into this critical industry of our time? Have you found your mission in this?
I would say my mission has always been to ensure that everyone is able to live a dignified life. In this particular moment, I see the AI industry and its approach to AI development deeply challenging the ability of people around the world to live dignified lives. And so I'm focusing on holding them accountable. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, for the rest of my life, I'm just going to be fixated on this thing, because hopefully it won't be a problem.
Would you ever work for one of these companies?
No.
Categorically?
No.
It's a big thing to say no, never, too, not least because of the massive amounts of money that are involved these days in the way that they recruit.
If I orchestrated my life around money, I wouldn't be a journalist.
So are there other players then, perhaps the smaller ones, where you do see principle, where you can imagine perhaps being tempted to work for them? We had Fei Li on the podcast a few months ago, and she clearly feels very strongly about values, and that the most important thing is that you're a person with values and you bring that to your work, and that's the answer.
When I say that I'm not willing to work for any of these companies, I'm talking about the empires of AI. I'm not talking about literally all AI companies that could ever come to pass. I think if there were companies out there that started focusing on the kinds of problems that I think are important to solve, and also are developing AI with an approach towards protecting human agency, sustainability, and so forth, then yeah, I would happily consider. I mean, not that I think I would be a very good asset to them. I think I'm better off being a journalist, but that's what I meant. I mean, in fact, in my epilogue of my book, I talk about a nonprofit organization called Tahiku Media that built this AI speech recognition tool for the Te Reo Maori language of the indigenous people in New Zealand. And they have a really beautiful story around how they went about developing their AI model. They went to their community and first asked, do you even want this tool? We think that it would help with revitalizing the Maori language. We can open up our archives of all of this Te Reo Maori that they had recorded as a radio station for over 30 years. And you'll be able to listen to that audio. You'll see the transcriptions. You can click on the words and get translations automatically. But they were like, also, we recognize that speech recognition tools can be used to surveil our community as well. And it was only through participation with the community and the consent of the community that they then started developing this technology. They only used 2 computer chips to train their model. And this is just a totally different approach. And so, if Tahiku Media were hiring, I'd be like, sure, why not?
And the fact that you respond as passionately as you do to an example like that, do you think that is to do with your own heritage and the fact that being Chinese American, you have been able to see the world from at least two angles through what you've seen from your parents and growing up in the US.
Yeah, I do think so. I think that growing up Chinese American made me realize that there's always many, many sides to a story. There are always many worldviews and many value systems by which you can approach the world. And when I see one particular narrative, one view of the world really monopolizing the conversation, saying, this is how it's going to be, this is the way that the world works, it just makes me question, well, what are the other stories that are not being told? Who are the other people that are not at the table, that don't get a voice to contest and challenge this dominant narrative?
Finally, Claude or ChatGPT, what do you use?
Neither.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
What is the alternative in your life?
None. My mind.
You don't, okay, but you do Google searches, obviously.
Yeah, of course, but I don't use generative AI.
You don't at all.
Mm-mm.
And you don't feel it holds you back. You don't,
I feel it actually liberates me.
That is quite inspiring to hear. Karen Hao, I'm going to think more about that and much else that you've shared. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that is where we left things, where we liberated Karen from the studio. And I hope you found the conversation as thought-provoking as I did. I want to add one note to the discussion on Malta, where all residents over 14 can do an AI literacy course and get free access for a year to either ChatGPT Plus or Microsoft 365 Personal Copilot. Karen said people in Malta were having their data harvested to train the next generation of models, and we put this to OpenAI and to Microsoft. OpenAI directed us to users being able to opt out of having their data used for training. Microsoft said, we do not train on data from users of Copilot within Microsoft 365 apps with personal subscriptions. Karen also said she'd like to know what the people of Malta think rather than the government. A recent survey suggested more than 50% of Maltese expect AI to have a positive impact on their lives over the next decade. And that was above the EU average. It is also worth noting Sam Altman's own perspective in something that he said in a blog post a few months ago. He wrote, "The fear and anxiety about AI is justified. We are in the process of witnessing the largest change to society in a long time, and perhaps ever." He added, AI has to be democratized. Power cannot be too concentrated. This, by the way, is just one of several conversations that we've had on the show that relate to AI. So in the show notes, you'll find links to episodes with Mustafa Suleiman of Microsoft AI. He gets pretty evangelical about what AI personal assistants can do. By this time next year, could I be buying my Christmas presents using an autonomous AI agent?
Yeah, I think it's highly, highly likely.
And you can also contrast that with Signal's Meredith Whittaker, who is having none of Mustafa's AI can buy your Christmas presents.
AI Christmas. Yeah, I can't wait. Everyone's getting a gift certificate to Microsoft Copilot.
And there's the conversation with Fei Li, the so-called godmother of AI, where she describes the light bulb moment when she understood how images could be gathered into a data set to train AI.
Everyone's life, work, well-being, future will somehow be touched by or impacted by AI.
So I hope you discover those and even more of what we do. And until the next time, goodbye.